So last night you should have read This Fleeting World pages 37 to 41. I just want to take a little bit of time here and go over some of the key components with it. So you want to label these notes This Fleeting World pages 37 to 41. And some of this we kind of have gone over a little bit before, or at least I've mentioned it, where the earliest agrarian era is a time where agrarian communities existed, but there's no large-scale cities or states. There's nothing bigger than that agrarian village. In fact, these villages are the largest communities on Earth. As I explained to them before, and again, use the video game analogy, these agrarian villages are level one of agrarian era societies. If you can't get to the village level or master the village level, you're not going to get to build to the city, you're not going to be able to build to the state, you're not going to be able to build to the civilization. You're kind of stuck at wherever the last place was that you were able to conquer, to accomplish. So in these places, in these agricultural villages, simple kinship rules are going to essentially be the basis of organization until the population becomes too large to kind of sustain it. Like family relationships always worked for hunters and gatherers or foragers because that's really all they were. They were a family group. So whatever the family hierarchy was, that's what the hierarchy was within the hunter and gatherer groups or within the forager groups. But now because we have so many people that aren't necessarily related to one another, that kind of family organization just simply isn't going to work. So we have to start to create some type of a hierarchy. Because again, remember, we have more food because of agriculture. So we have more people. And because we have more people, we have more needs. We have more problems. And the situation is going to start to get a little more complicated. And we need someone or some group to meet these needs, to meet these more problems, and to deal with them appropriately. One of the earliest type of hierarchies that these early agrarian communities would create are gender hierarchies. Success in farming really kind of required an all hands on deck type of approach. It was definitely a team effort where in order to sustain the family, they needed everyone's labor. Man, woman, child old enough to do work. But because this was so labor intensive and you had such a high demand for labor, large numbers of children were preferred. And this is really what starts to limit women's positions within these civilizations. Just sort of kind of the natural demands or encumberments of pregnancy, of early child rearing, like, for example, breastfeeding. You really can't necessarily go and do much beyond stay within the homestead to raise and rear the children. So it does limit a lot of women's opportunities. Another thing that also impacted this, and again, it kind of goes back to the fact that women, because of the demand for labor, because of the need for more children, are tied to the home. Warfare is also going to play a part in this, where more and more, as these societies or these villages become more complicated, warfare becomes a little bit more of a present thing where you have to either, expand your village and your influence and hope to gather more resources because, again, more people, more food, more problems. And again, like I said before, one of those more problems is how do we continue to provide for these more people? Oftentimes, warfare of expansion at this point is really based on trying to have access to necessary resources in order to support the population that you have. So whether it's war of aggression or you're defending your territory, women, because of the necessary burdens of pregnancy, childbirth, child rearing, are really kind of cut out of that because they have to stay close to the home Warfare and the participation as soldiers and as warriors just simply isn't going to be a possibility. And as warfare becomes more and more important, as population growth kind of intensifies the competition between communities, men start to monopolize the organization of violence. And as there's more war and men participating in warfare becomes more of a thing, men are able to then kind of turn that into a role within the new power structure. That they are the defenders, therefore they should be the rulers, the governing bodies or the governing persons of these various agricultural communities. And women are sort of kind of, defined more and more as their role within the household. Though, keep in mind, the demands of peasant life ensures that men and women will continue to work in a partnership. And this is going to exist well into the industrial era, where you have households that are kind of just making it by. One of the reasons why they're just making it by is because they require everyone's labor, everybody to go out and work in order to keep the family afloat, in order to sustain the family. So you'll see even in the 19th and the 20th century, where families that are organized that way, that there's an economic need for women to work, that there's more of a partnership between the men and the women, versus those upper class people whose families don't need women to work, you start to see big separation and a greater separation between men and women. One of the big issues that these early agrarian societies are going to have to do is create some means by which to bind people together. Like in the hunters and gatherers foragers, what bound them together was the fact that they were all a family unit. Well, now within these villages and eventually these cities and these states and these civilizations and these empires, you have your society being made up of dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of different and independent families. So what there almost needs to do is some type of idea that this is a team, to kind of create a commonality that will tie all of these non-biologically connected people together. And one of the things that they do is they take these genealogies, they take almost these myths where everyone within the village, to start with, kind of descends from the same, mystical or mythical ancestor. That even though they look as though they're separate families, in reality, they're all one. So your next door neighbor isn't this other family. They're kind of a long distance relation to you. So that's going to prompt you to want to help out a family member rather than just, this stranger that's next door. So creating these genealogies does two things. One, like I pretty much said, it creates a sense of community. It creates a sense of team, like they all pretty much are wearing, the same jersey, that they all are, different branches from the same tree. They're all, sort of kind of like distant members of the same family. It also is going to develop a story to justify power or status. What's going to happen with these stories, especially one that has this, mystical ancestor that is responsible for the creation of the village? Those rulers or those members of the ruling elite, the upper class, are going to claim more direct ancestry from that original ancestor. And they'll use that closeness in relationship to justify them taking power. Because basically they'll go and they'll say, well, you know what, we're first cousins, not like you guys who are, 27th cousins. So we're more of a direct ancestor to the founding member, our founding leader. And this kind of helps to reinforce some parts of the hierarchy.